Hello, and welcome to our video audio podcast, Couched in Color. I'm your mental health expert, teen and young adult crusader, and psychological scientist, Dr. Alfiee. This podcast reflects my life's work, helping our young people and young at heart identify mental health challenges, disrupt negative patterns, and discover the best versions of themselves. I'm so happy that you've joined us. For over 20 years, I want you to know that I've had my finger on the pulse of BIPOC teen mental health. I recognize that historically and currently, with these dual pandemics of COVID and racial injustice raging, our young people are suffering, sometimes they're struggling, and always the care that they need is quite scarce. So each week, I'm joined by young people, mental health experts, celebrities, and influencers to help us uncover the secrets to healing the hearts and minds of our BIPOC teens, their families, and their communities. Here at Couched in Color, we believe deeply in spreading love and light, bolstered by culturally relevant science. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have a mentor of mine here, Dr. Faye Belgrave. I'm going to have her introduce herself to you in a second, but I just want to share a little bit about how I came to know her. I want to say it was through one of those family research consortium meetings. And this was like 2002, I want to say. So SRCD, Society for Research and Child Development, maybe some of those folks in the mix too. But I was newly married. I didn't even have any kids yet. And so we go way back.
Way back.
So in any event, it's a pleasure to have Dr. Belgrave here. And I would like to ask you, Doctor, to just introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your work and your interest in this area of young people and mental health.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to come before your audience. I certainly follow you on Twitter and I know all of the great work you're doing. But I'm Faye Belgrave, and currently I'm an Associate Dean for Equity and Community Partnership in the College of Humanities and Sciences, and also a professor of psychology and the founding director of the Center for Cultural Experiences and Prevention, which I founded back in 2002 to work collaboratively with the community to address some of the problems in the local community. So much of my work has been done in conjunction with community-based organizations. And I must say that I frequently reference your work, because I still reference that how to do community engaged work. So thank you for leading us through the COMA project. I don't think I have too many publications that don't reference you at least once. I just want to put that out there. It's still now not really been it's not been done to the extent that people think, even though community-based engagement is in vogue and there's funding for it where it used to not be, but you led the way. And also yours was truly community engaged. So I know I'm supposed to be talking about myself. I have the mic. So a lot of my work is grounded in health disparities, health equity, understanding health equity, improving health equity. That's sort of like the research. And I don't just do research. We do a lot of programs, a lot of services to try to level the field, especially in HIV prevention, which is my overall area of research. So that's done through the Center for Cultural Experiences and Prevention. Another part of my my expertise has been in the area of African-American psychology. So I've done a lot. I believe I still have the first textbook in African-American psychology. Putting a little plug out there.
There you go.
And also, of course, this new book that we're going to talk about, co-authored with Heather Jones and Trenette Clark Goings. And then the third part of my work has been to promote equity and inclusion. And I don't say diversity so much because...
No, educate us, please. Tell us why you don't say it.
Because, I mean, we, at least at my institution and in many institutions, we are diverse. We have, diverse ideas, diverse gender, diverse ethnicity, diverse race and ethnicity, diverse ages, disability status, but we don't have inclusion and equity. And so I really want to focus more on instituting policies that make a difference in terms of why underrepresented minority faculty are not getting tenured and promoted to the extent that other faculty are. Why are all the Black and brown people doing all the EID, and I say equity, inclusion, and diversity rather than the DI. So why is that, so why is that the case? So yeah, I think, it all kind of marries together, because to truly understand, for me as a Black woman, sort of what's going on in Black psychology, I have to understand the lack of equity, inclusion, and diversity. So yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a bit about that also.
Of course.
And again, I'm in the College of Humanities and Sciences.
At what institution? Because I'm not sure we said it.
Commonwealth University.
Yeah, so I want everybody to hear that at VCU. So Dr. Belgrave is at VCU. Yeah, so.
And please call me Faye, whatever you prefer, but I usually go by first name.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right, will do. So part of what you've spoken to is a really beautiful blend of your interest that's infused in all of your work, right? I hear a lot of commitment to an investment in racially, ethnically diverse people. I hear a lot of investment and commitment to, in your particular case, health disparities. And I hear a lot of investment in engagement, this community engagement piece, which, we really bonded around, because that's super important to me. And so I guess I'm wondering, can you share a little bit about, and maybe your book can tie into this too, if you tell us the title of the book, and then tell us a little bit about how your passion for HIV prevention work in diverse communities, with community collaboratively, how have you seen that grow and change over the years? Because I'm gonna say 25 years ago, before we had the seminal report by Dr. Satcher, we would try to sit down and have these conversations. I know for me, I would just get eye rolls. And why is it any different for Black kids than it is for anybody else? And I'm sure it was similar for you publishing the first textbook, as far as we know, right? I'm gonna agree with you, Faye, as publishing that first textbook on African-American psychology. I'm sure there's been this arc. And so can you talk a little bit about, it's a big question, but can you talk a little about this arc of your work and how you've seen things change over time in terms of community-based participatory work, people of color, and in particular, us working collaboratively to address health disparities? And please do get a plug for your new book in there as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the reason I was invited. Well, I co-authored, and let me say I co-authored African-American Psychology also, Kevin Allison. But one thing I've found in my community work, in my textbooks, I've written books on African-American boys, African-American girls, and other things. One thing that, and when I would go out and do community-based work in the local communities with local community partners, it was this theme of African-American families, right? So I can't really talk about, the mental health of African-American children without talking about African-American families. And so the name of the book is African-American Families, Research, Theory, and Practice. And
love it.
Co-authors are Trinette Clark Goings and Heather Jones, also from VCU, and Trinette is from UNC.
Love it.
So I just felt like that theme. So when we founded the center, we said that the mission was to work collaboratively with youth and families to better the conditions of the community, right?
Love it, yes.
So again, we have this focus on families. When I wrote different books, it was always a big chapter on the family. And so that, and there were some books on African-American family. We wanted a comprehensive, authoritative voice that brought together what we saw as some of the major issues. So chapter on mental health.
Okay.
But there's also a chapter on racial socialization and,
yes.
and how do you parent children who
yes.
are African descent. So there's also a chapter on African-American fathers, a chapter on African-American grandparents, because this is our family. And so it was thinking through the importance of the family. So we wrote it as a textbook, but also to be used as a resource manual for maybe someone who wants to develop a program for
yes.
African-American family. You know, we're
yes.
disciplinary. Heather is a clinical psychologist. My training is in community health and social psychology. Trinette's training is in social work. We also authored the book, but we also co-authored a few of the chapters. Like I co-authored a chapter on urban families with sociologists. And we also authored a few chapters with graduate students. So, you know, I co-authored a chapter with the graduate student on African-American religion, because it's so central to who we are.
That's right.
So that brings the family within the context of understanding African-American religion and practices, including practices that carried over from the continent, from Africa. So
that's awesome.
I'll stop here because I could go on.
No, I love that. That's fascinating. And one thing that I believe would really help our listeners and our viewers, because we're audio and video, is if you could talk about two things in a little bit more detail. I love every time I hear somebody talk about racial socialization. And there are not a lot of people, I think, who understand what that is. Could you explain and teach us a little bit more about that concept of racial socialization?
Yeah. And there's a chapter in the book called Parenting African-American Youth. And I spent a lot of time in this chapter. We talk about how do you racially socialize, you know, and of course there are many, Stevenson, Enrica Nevitt, I believe. There's
Rihanna,
people who
Anderson.
have done work in this area. Yes, so we
right.
could name 5. I hope I didn't exclude anyone, but we
No, you're good. Those are, I mean, everybody knows that, you know, there's some sort of.
Yes. Including a new faculty at VCU, Sean Jones. I have to give a plug to.
Of course, to your faculty, of course.
Yes, because he has written some of the seminal work also. But racial socialization is the process of having parents socialize their children about what it means to be Black in this country. And so there are different components of racial socialization, but one of the major 2 components, I would say there are 3 or 4, but depending on who's reporting, but the major one is to prepare your child for the fact that he, she, they will be discriminated against. Because that inoculates them from that discrimination that's inevitable. You know, in this country, about 75% of African-American youth have 1 or more acts of discrimination a month. So preparing your child for this discrimination, when it occurs, they know how to react to it. The other component has to do with instilling a sense of belongingness, pride, joy, and being of African descent. So here you take your child to a Black bookstore, frequent Black merchants, do things that bring out the pride and joy, have African-centered art in your home. So that also inoculates them from that inevitable discrimination. And we know even in low resource neighborhoods that children who have been racially socialized will just do better. So you can imagine even in more affluent neighborhoods, children who are racially socialized will do better. And I'll just say briefly, the third facet is to, you know, socialize your child about achievement in this country. You know, there are certain things you got to study if you want to get good grades, right? You should have manners. So just socializing them and just being a decent human being, and also toward ethics and morals and values. But what is so important is that socialization around who you are, who you represent, and again around discrimination and racism.
all of that is so important. And it just makes me think, as you were talking, I was taking it in, and I was also thinking to myself that those are all things that my parents did for us, my brother and me. My mom's deceased now, but you know, I just can remember the art, the books, going to festivals. We had this thing where I grew up in the Hampton Roads area in Tidewater in Virginia Beach. And every year they used to have this thing at, I forget what the name of the place was, but it was by it was Harbor View. I think they called it Harbor View. And we used to call, and it was called Afram Fest. It was the African American.
Yes, I remember Afram. Oh, yes, I've been there.
Afram Fest, yes. And so my mom, a lot of people don't know this, but she ran the vendors section. And after she passed, they renamed it Mattie's Place, because her name was Mattie, Mattie. They renamed it for her until they shut it down. And so Afram Fest that was the staple of my teen years. I think every year I was in high school.
You look forward to it.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful because it was a place where you could go and, to your point, just see and experience and hear and touch and taste all of who you were in very positive ways. And so this idea of racial socialization is so critical. And I wonder if, as we wind down, can you articulate for us your thoughts or your expertise in how does teaching our children about who they are as racial beings in a place like the US support their mental health? Because I don't know if people really understand what that relationship is between racial socialization and mental health.
Yeah, I think it supports children in, and I know self-esteem is an overused term.
Yes.
But it does support them in building character, self-esteem, so that they feel better about who they are individually, but just as importantly, collectively. So I think that's the way the process. So once they feel good about who they are, where they came from, that leads to good feelings collectively about their group. And so I think that's how it ties into mental health. And also, we all, especially our children, are going to have some bad days. Inoculates them. So when somebody says a racial slur, I don't internalize it. It keeps my self-esteem intact.
Yes.
So I'm not internalizing what it means I'm not internalizing the negativity. I am proud of who I am in spite of the negativity.
Oh my goodness.
I think that's the way that it goes. Yeah.
I love that. And what I'll say as we wind down is that what I try to share with young people all the time is that when you experience these racist encounters, to your point, I want them to understand people don't do things to you because you are fill in the blank. It's not because I'm Black. It's because that person is racist.
That's right.
So for me, that's a reframe of what you just said about you don't internalize that. That's not about you. That's about that other person. Now, it's hurtful, but if, like you said, if we've been taught that this is something that might be coming and we give our children skills, I think about how Dr. Stevenson teaches kids skills. That's part of his program. We teach you skills for how to deflect that stuff to keep it off you. It's like Aikido. You're going to, bob and weave so that stuff doesn't sting you. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, talking with us about your book, sharing with us your experience and expertise in this area of health disparities in diverse communities, African-American and Black folks of the diaspora, and even giving big ups to your faculty. So I'm just, congratulations on, I think because we had been out of touch for a while, I didn't realize you had moved into administration. And so I'm really excited for you and just excited for the faculty who have the opportunity to benefit from you. And so in closing, let me ask, are there any parting words you'd like to share? And then one more time, tell us the name of that book so people can go get it.
Absolutely. Yeah, the parting word is to continue to listen to your podcast. Because you really impart just sometimes things I want to say. And the book is African-American Psychology, Research, Theory, and Practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I know you said Faye, but I want the young people to hear with respect. This is Dr. Faye Belgrave from Virginia Commonwealth University, an all-around superstar and just a wonderful person and mentor to me in our field of Black youth and other youth of color and families, to her point. mental health. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
So it's my pleasure, right? We have a 3-part podcast today, and I wanted each one of these dynamic sisters to have her own space to really talk about her work. And so today, also, we have Dr. Trinette Goings, who is faculty at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, my husband's alma mater. And I just want to big her up because it ain't nothing nice, y'all hear me say all the time, in these academic streets. And she has been super successful at Chapel Hill. And so I would like to just welcome you, Dr. Goings, and have you please introduce yourself and also tell us the name of your book.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Alfiee, for really the opportunity to be here. I am thrilled to be in this space. I am Trenette Clark Goings. I am the Sandra Reed Spears and John B. Turner Distinguished Professor in the School of Social Work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I am also the director of the Inspired Lab, which stands for Innovative and Strategic Prevention in Racial and Ethnic Health Disparities. So I'm really interested in health disparities broadly, really interested in identifying those health disparities and then preventing them. And so to achieve that goal, I do a lot of work focused on substance use prevention, also other health outcomes such as chronic pain, alopecia. Currently have a grant focused on COVID, coping with COVID. We're studying essential workers and trying to understand more about how they're coping. And then have 2 large grants. One is an R1 focused on substance use among biracial adolescents. And so I'm using 2 large data sets to integrate them. We call it integrative data analysis to understand more about substance use among biracial youth. And then a second study funded by SAMHSA, CSAP. And we are really implementing multiple interventions with youth, parents, and the community with the goal of evaluating them in 4 counties in North Carolina. And so really just interested in health disparities broadly with the goal of trying to prevent health disparities so that we live longer lives. And so, yeah, you're right. We have this new book that I'm thrilled about. It's called AfricanAmerican Families. I have it right here.
Beautiful.
To show yes, AfricanAmerican Families. And I'm really excited about this book. You know, people keep asking why we decided to write this book. And I always say, first, I am an African-American woman, right? I am an African-American mom to a little boy and a little girl, wife, daughter, sisters, niece, auntie. And so I love people, and I wanted to write this book so that we can really begin to move to the rhetoric we've been talking about. So we can begin to move towards anti-racism, begin to move towards culturally congruent and humble practices. And so for me, this tool is really meant to be used to educate people so that we are really beginning to live up to our aspirations of anti-racism and, again, culturally congruent practices.
Oh, I love this. So talk to us a little bit about living up to these ideals around anti-racism. How does that show up in this area of health disparities? How does that show up for Black families? Just educate us a little bit about that.
So, you know, I think of anti-racism as really an active pursuit of dismantling racism, right? Beginning with understanding that all humans are just that, humans. There is no superiority. Race is socially constructed. It's nothing biological. And so really anti-racism for me is the active pursuit of dismantling the white supremacy that we see across the globe. And for me, you know, one way that we do that in a way that can impact African-American families is, again, by actively pursuing it. So speaking out when you see it, contacting your policymakers. I always believe that we have to influence policy, but the way you influence policy is by influencing policymakers. And so for me, I'm a behavior researcher, and the way I do that is by trying to have them at the table. So I have House of Representatives on my advisory council, right? And so that we can share with them what we're learning, and then they can go in and influence policy. So one way that we influence racist policies, I think, is by having conversations with policymakers, letting our voice be heard. It starts with us, though. It starts with us. It's all of us. We need everyone at the table to try to move our country forward to reaching those aspirations. Again, I think we have to start with policy. We have to start with the structures. It's not enough to simply focus on the interpersonal level, but we have to really begin to think about systems.
Oh, wow. That's powerful. So for anybody who might be unfamiliar, or who might have idea, like our audience out there is families, it's parents, it's young people, all of whom may have a passion for exactly what you're describing, but they have no idea how to begin the process of maybe advocating for themselves or advocating for their communities. Is any of your work tied into that? Like, how do you, like, educating people, showing them how do they in the community as individuals, as families, get involved in trying to influence? And I think an addendum to that is, how do they get involved with people like you, a distinguished professor who's doing research on health disparities? Talk a little bit about any of the work that you've done in this area of community engagement or engaging community members.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Literally, next week we're having a couple town halls in the community, right? So that we can talk about what we've been learning. We've been talking to community stakeholders, learning about substance use on the ground. There are things that I know from these national studies, but the people who really know, I think, is the community. And so we're having town halls over the next couple of weeks in the community to learn. I think if you see those, speak up, build relationships, let's work together, reach out. You know, I've always been known for reaching out to people, networking. If you see an area that you're really interested in, and I'm speaking to young people now, if you see an area that you're really interested in, I would say reach out to stakeholders, reach out to professors and others in the community who are interested in this work, and ask how you can partner. Also, I dare not omit the power of social media. Yeah. Use social media, all these hashtags to try to move this forward. Our voice is so powerful. And I think, again, just reaching out to people, cold emailing people, cold calling people, but also using social media to try to do this. I will say that Dr. Faye Belgrave and I are in the process of writing a paper that will speak to this, right? Like, what is anti-racism and how do we, everyone get involved in this work? And so stay tuned for that. We'll be releasing that hopefully within the next few months.
I love it. I love it. Now, one thing I definitely want to circle back to that you mentioned that's very timely is you said you've recently been funded to study the impact of COVID on, can you tell us a little bit about that work? I would just love for people to hear that because it's so timely, like right in this moment.
Yeah, so we were funded by the NC Policy Collaboratory in North Carolina to study coping among essential workers. So we are conducting a mixed method study using qualitative research. So we've done some interviews with essential workers, and we are now in the process of doing survey research with essential workers to better understand really their experience in COVID. You know, essential workers are on the front line. We know that people of color are more likely than others to be on the front line as essential workers. And so really we are conducting the study with people of color who are essential workers to better understand how they're coping with COVID. It's a lot. As you know, there are multiple pandemics at play. One is COVID, the other is the racial unrest with the continued killings of unarmed people. So we have a lot on our plates as people of color these days. And so we just want to really understand more about how they're coping with it, be it both positive and negative, so that we can then begin to develop interventions to support this population going forward. And I do, just speaking of hesitancy, I do want to say this quickly. Speaking of COVID, I do want to say this quickly, that there's this narrative that people are creating about the hesitancy of people of color as it relates to the COVID vaccine. And I do want to say, I guess, two things. One is there may be a hesitancy, and if so, we know that it's justified given not only our history, but contemporary factors. But that also, part of it, I think, is also the social determinants of health. Access. Are people of color getting the vaccine at the same rate as others? So let us not forget that it's not only hesitancy, if it is, we don't know, but there is also the social determinants of health.
Yeah, I'd like that you bring that up. I think one thing that people underestimate in terms of those of us who are Black is they underestimate Black people's ability to have open eyes and see what's going on around them. I think for any member of the BIPOC community, right? Because there was some research early on that talked about Asian Americans, certain subpopulation of Asian Americans out in LA were were wait and see. That's what I like to say, had a really wait and see perspective about the vaccine. And I think we have to be honest as researchers and say, to your point, yes, there are folks who may have some apprehension or who have a wait and see attitude, but some of that is due to to your point as well, their experiences with the medical field, right? Historically. And I'm not even talking about Tuskegee. I'm talking about maternal health outcomes. I'm talking about Serena Williams and her experience. I'm talking about these birth outcomes, the CDC doctor who studied maternal health outcomes, but died giving birth to her child, right? Those kinds of things. And so I think it's really important for people like you who do this work and people like me who do this work, that we talk about this like sort of in a well-rounded way, just as you just did, right? So there are access issues. So there are many people who want it, who are of color, who can't get it, right? That's a piece of it. There are also people who are not sure if they want it. And so I think the kind of work that you do really helps us get at all of these aspects at the same time. That's critical, right? To tackle all of it. So I appreciate you for the work that you're doing. It is so meaningful and so timely. You named multiple studies, and each one of those studies has such high relevance right now, because we know substance abuse skyrocketing, right, during the pandemic, overdoses, and Black folks in particular. I have a good colleague, Dr. Ayanna Jordan, who's a substance use researcher up at Yale, and she talks about this a lot. And so it's just really wonderful to know that there are people like you out there doing this work, really uplifting and holding people of color. You mentioned multiracial people. That's really important. I think about Meghan Markle a couple of weeks ago and just her experiences and what she described. So we're just really grateful to have the work that you're doing. I'm really happy that you held the book up so people can see it. But I would love for you in closing to just share any final thoughts or any things I didn't get to ask. And I can think of one thing I didn't get to ask. It's about parenting in the space of the pandemic. So do you have any parting words and any thoughts for parents as they're trying to support their children through this dual pandemics of racial injustice and COVID and so many other things?
Yes. You know, as a mom, right, of a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, I'd say what we try to do is offer stability, right? To the best of our abilities, is just to really keep things as normal as possible. They're not in school. My daughter can't go to gymnastics. They can't do karate. And so, but to the extent possible is to keep things normative at home. But also we're having honest conversation with our kids. You're right, we're in the middle of a dual pandemic and we're talking to them, we're racially socializing them. So we're having honest conversations about race. Research suggests that the earlier you have those conversations, the better the outcomes for your kids in terms of psychological well-being. And kids can really begin to have those conversations as early as 3 and 4. So we're talking to them about race and racism, what it means in this country. We're also many of our books have brown and Black people as the main characters, textured hair, beautiful hair. We are singing songs like Beyonce's Brown Skin Girl, right? We are making up our own, we're making up our own very positive songs. We use affirmations. I'm instilling in them that they are great, they are made for greatness. And so even though we are in the middle of this dual pandemic, I am reminding them that they should be proud of who they are. And we're trying to keep things as normal as possible at home. We're using a lot of FaceTime, a lot of Zoom parties. But yes, I would tell parents to just continue to keep things as normal as you can. This too shall pass, I believe. And so just to continue to racially socialize your kids, be honest with them about where we are in this country. And just, as I said, all the positive books you can with pretty brown and Black faces and songs and everything we can think of to try to shape our kids into being the great people that they were designed to be.
I love it. I love it. Well, Dr. Trinette Clark Goings, it has been an honor to have you on the podcast. Anytime I hear a sister say she got an R01, I'm gonna give a big up. Right, people have heard me talk about R01s on my podcast before. For people who don't remember, that's the National Institutes of Health grant. It's sort of the flagship grant for researchers, people who are academics, primarily, but traditional academics. And we know that there are disparities in the numbers of Black people specifically
Yes.
who are able to get these. And so the fact that you have it, we want to celebrate that, and we want to wish you well, and we want you to continue to succeed, because when you succeed, particularly given the things that you study, that uplifts all of us BIPOC folks. So thank you so much for being with us. And it is a pleasure to have you on. And I'm looking forward to getting a copy of the book and promoting it and letting everybody put it back up here on my little makeshift shelf back here. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you also. I've watched you soar over the years from when you were at Duke, and it's just amazing to watch you soar and to see you in this space. So thank you. I appreciate you role modeling for all of us.
Oh, you are so welcome. And thank you. And you take care, okay? Yeah. All right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. So we have our last but not least, we have our final guest, which is really kind of how all of this started. Dr. Heather Jones is a colleague I've known for a long time. I've known Dr. Jones since right when she got her first academic appointment, I think we met when you were in grad school, I want to say.
I think we probably did.
Yeah, it's been a number of years. And so it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Dr. Jones is an author as well of this new book on African-American families, or African-American psychology, I'm sorry. And if you would just introduce yourself, tell us the title of the book, and then kind of blend into your passion for this work. Specifically, what are your specific research interests? What kinds of things do you have going on now? I would love for our audience to learn more about you and your work.
Absolutely. So I am Dr. Heather Jones, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am a faculty member at Virginia Commonwealth University. It's in Central Virginia, in Richmond, which is a majority Black city. And my area of interest, expertise, experience has always been focused on the Black experience and how to improve the well-being of BIPOC communities broadly, but more specifically Black families. And so with regard to my research, my teaching, my service, I always center it on how is this helping Black folks? And so my new book with Dr. Belgrave and Dr. Clark Goings, it's called African-American Families, Research, Theory, and Practice. And we really wanted to write this book. Some of the more flagship books on Black families are several decades old now and haven't been updated. And then two, a lot of what we read, and I know that you know this, Dr. Freeland Noble, a lot of what we read about Black families is very negative focused. It's very focused on poor outcomes this, what's going wrong in the Black communities that. And we really wanted to write a book that was more strength focused, that talked a lot about the resiliency that we see within Black families, and also how diverse we are as a community, because there's no like monolithic what it means to be Black. There's a lot of different values. There are a lot of different family structures. And we really just wanted to highlight this in the book, which is designed for like upper level undergraduates, undergraduate students, graduate students, practitioners in the community, community members, parents, that we have chapters on parenting, we have chapters on youth mental health, grandparents, we have a chapter on grandparents raising their kids, because we know that that's central to who we are as a community. And we really just wanted this book to represent updates in the literature from a strength-based, kind of more positive frame of being. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of that, particularly in the day and age and era that we are in right now in the United States.
So there's obvious reasons for why you would have written it, why you would have put the book together. Part of it is, like you said, the literature in this space is decades old, number one. Number two, it's always, I'm always talking about that. So I'm glad you like signal boosted it. I get tired of people talking about Black folks in one context, right? And in my family, we have this running joke. Now I can say this because I got some Pookies in my family, but we say the way people like to look at research in our field is Pookie and them. That's the only experience of Black people that exists. That is one experience of Black people, one. And it's very focused on one subset of our population, which is those of us who are descended from, enslaved people, number one, and two, who come from a certain socioeconomic status.
Exactly.
They are important. That part of our community is important, because in Black families, you got all of that in your family. I got a Pookie in my family. Do you know what I mean? Like we all have it. And so that's one part. That is not the Dr. Jones of the world lived experience. You have a different experience.
Right. We can just talk, or it might have been the Dr. Jones of the world like 30 years ago, but but you know, people's circumstances change, people's family members change. There's just a lot that the book talks about in terms of the resiliency of Black families, from small things like the rise of urban gardens, and how like couched in our history, our like farming history that is, to kind of the importance of all of the current research coming out on racial socialization in Black families, and how that is protective for kids who are critically able to look at race and to gauge in different circumstances. What should my emotions be right now outwardly to other people based on the people around me? Those are the Black kids that have lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of depression, because issues of discrimination, events of discrimination, though they happen to us, may not strike them the same way because they've got that protective factor in place.
I love it. I love it.
So write about that.
Yes, and it's so important that you do write about it, because, you know, like in a contemporary manner, right? Because Dr. Belgrave and I talked about, you know, we know the people who have done this work for years and years and years, like who sort of started the work, or who were early pioneers, right? So like Dr. Howard Stevenson and all his mentees, it's like a tree with branches. Like I've mentored some of the people who came out of his lab, who are still engaged in this work. Oh yeah. Oh, all the Michigan folks, girl, all of them, right? Like that's the bastion of Black psychology, literally, is Michigan. Everybody came out of Michigan. So I think especially in clinical psych. And so, can you educate us a little bit about I want people to hear, what does racial socialization look like? What's an example of how a parent would engage in that with the child?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is thinking about, I'll back up. I'm going to answer your question.
Yeah.
You know, I've been struck, in recent days, we've had, and over the past year of the pandemic, there has been a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes.
Yep.
I've been struck in the conversations that I'm in these mom groups, by moms who hadn't ever really thought about the construct of race all that much outwardly, and hadn't done a lot of education with their children, saying, oh, I guess I need to now talk about this, or I have my child asking about this and I don't know how to do it. And as a Black mom, I'm like, child, we've been doing that. Like,
yeah, I don't know that experience, honestly. I respect it, but I don't know how you been. I don't know how you do that. Yeah.
And so, you know, when children say to their parents, why won't so-and-so play with me? Here's what happened when the pandemic, not when the pandemic hit, but when our previous president won that election.
Yes.
In mental health clinics, and I don't know whether you had the same experience, but in mental health clinics, we had Black kids coming in saying their white friends who had been their friends wouldn't play with them anymore. Or that they were going into the bathrooms and they were seeing, you know, things scribbled on the walls or on the stalls. And it was, you know, this prejudice and racism had been there, right? Yep. It wasn't new with the previous president, but there was this freedom, I think, that folks felt to be able to talk more freely about how they felt about people of color.
Yes.
During the last presidency, in a negative way, right? My sister and I were in the Charlottesville area coming back from a camping trip, and we got accosted at a gas station by a man who told us we needed to go back up north and we weren't taking his statues from him.
What?
Oh my goodness. And so those are the types of, I'm so thankful that my child, who was in the back seat of the car, was, I don't know, Charlottesville was maybe 3 or so at the time. And so he didn't understand, or he wasn't kind of tuned into any of that conversation. But if he had been older, you know, this is where a conversation and that racial socialization comes in. This is where you have to sit down and with my child, we have already started having these conversations. You know, Black parents have these conversations early and often. What it means to be Black, including areas of pride and to talk about that we're really proud of, as well as what it means to be Black in America, the context of being Black in America. And there are some things to talk about that are hard things to talk about there.
Yes.
They're not easy things to talk about. About holding your tongue sometimes, about, you know.
With battles.
Certain people in certain situations. Right.
Yes.
One thing, I'm going off on a tangent here, but you know.
No, you're fine.
I mean, you know my work. So one thing I often will talk about with colleagues is how, with my colleagues who also do kind of behavioral management work with regard to, you know, and I'll hear, oh, Black families are too overbearing. Black parents are too overbearing. They don't give their kids enough freedom. And they're not loving enough. And I say, wait a second, you have to look at the context in which our parenting occurs. If I'm all loosey-goosey with my son, I'm not watching what he's doing, he could get shot and not come home to me. Do you have to worry about that? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so these conversations that are so important that we have with our children, and not just BIPOC folks, white folks need to be having these conversations too. Early and often. Everybody needs, they're so important. They help us create this society, which I think we're starting to see and we've been seeing in our young folks right now who are excited about diversity. They're excited about issues with regard to equity. And we just need more of that. We need more people where that's the norm.
Yes.
And the outliers are the folks that don't want diversity or don't want equity or don't see a need for talking about issues related to racial socialization or just want a colorblind society, which is harmful. We talk in the book about how that's harmful.
Oh, totally harmful. I learned this new thing. It was so fascinating. It was either Cartoon Network, or it might have been Nickelodeon. And they have these videos, right? And these videos there was this one video, my head almost exploded. It was a Black child, a white child, and a purple alien. It just came out recently. And so I think the white kid says, I don't care if you're Black, white, purple, blah, blah, blah. And then the purple alien stops the conversation and said, hold up. And just gives this beautiful, at a little kid level, articulation of why you don't throw purple in there. It's dismissive. It gets to this idea of colorblind. There are no purple humans on your planet Earth. Why would you throw purple in there? And I was just like, what in the world? Right? So I was really just blown away. Well, I happen to know that it might've been Netflix, one of my daughter's friends, her father is a professor, used to be a professor at George Mason University in like educational technology. And so just went to Netflix, I think full time, as a creative director. And I'm thinking that is why we have, right? That's why we're able to have these kinds of conversations. Because people like you do the work, people like him do the work, and then they're able to bring it into.
Plant these seeds.
For me, yes, to plant the seeds. And so I'm thinking that's racial socialization. And that's racial socialization for white kids too. So they're watching and they're going to be enlightened in a way that even their parents are not enlightened. So they're gonna be like, no, mom, we don't say red, purple, black, white, blah, 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 because whatever. And I think like you, that's what we need. Right.
We just need to be having these conversations, and kids need to be comfortable having these conversations and just trying to learn about their backgrounds and their place, you know, in the community where we live. It's just really important.
I think so too. So I know you have a family you have to take care of, and I'm trying to be super respectful of that. And we always want to honor that because that's a big part of what we do, both with my nonprofit and with the podcast. So I would like to ask if, in closing, there are any final thoughts that you have for parents or for our young people, right? Because you are a mental health professional. What kinds of things can they be thinking about or doing in this moment to take care of their mental health from your perspective?
Gosh, there's so much, right? Because this is a tough time. This is a tough time for BIPOC folks in the middle of the pandemic, particularly. And taking a break when you need to take a break. That's what I say to moms all the time, because I work with a lot of moms. I'm like, if you need a break, you take a break. One of the great things and areas of resiliency in Black communities is that we have really diverse social support systems. So there's usually like an auntie or a neighbor or somebody, cousin, who can come and watch the kids for a little bit if you need a 15-minute break, a 30-minute break, some sort of, hour-long break. And I know we're in the middle of the pandemic, so it's not like folks can go somewhere necessarily if you don't feel comfortable doing that. But even going into another room and having some quiet time in another room, a nap. Naps are wonderful and restorative. I'm a big proponent of naps for parents if you need it. They're not just for kids, but in terms of their parenting, talking a lot about the pride that you feel for the Black culture to your kids is so important, because they're going to be hit in the face with negative stereotypes and myths about Black culture for the rest of their lives. So now, while they're young, build up that pride as much as you can, because it's just really protective, is what we found in terms of mental health.
Oh, that is beautiful. Everything you said, I'm just going to echo. And the only fine point I'll put on it is that what you're describing is we have to build a cocoon of self-esteem, self-respect, racial socialization around those kids when they're little, so that by the time they're leaving us, going out into the world, even in kindergarten, right? Going out, even in preschool, that they can be butterflies and be out there proud of themselves and flying. So thank you so much. I love that
metaphor.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Jones. I appreciate your time. Thank you for the book that you just contributed to the world. We want everybody to go out there and get it. And I hope that you are continuing to take care of yourself and get you some breaks, because I know being a mommy of little ones is hard, but we just really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. So there you have it. That's a wrap for another episode of Couched in Color. We want you to know that we deeply value you, all of our viewers and our listeners, and everyone out there working to support optimal mental health, both for themselves and for our young people. And one of the best ways you can help our movement is by leaving us a 5-star review on our YouTube channel and everywhere you enjoy your audio podcasts, and by sharing our podcast with a friend. Please also tag us while you're out there listening and watching. Finally, head on over to dralfiee.com for more information about me, www.acomaproject.org for information about my nonprofit, and those are the places you can go to learn more about how you can help. So I'll see you next week. And until then, I'm going to say what I always say, which is that I'm wishing you lots of love, lots of light, and that I'm hoping it is always, always informed by good, culturally relevant science. Take care.